Now we're waiting for all these people to show up. But now we're starting to come. Well, we have a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to get started. I'm sure there'll be people who are getting let in or something like that. I don't have them on my screen, but they're out there somewhere, I guess. Welcome to Brainstorming the Human Connection. This is Lawrence Diggs, your host, and how do they call it? Inquisitor. We're going to be talking about forgiveness today. And by the way, this program is brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. And it is an interactive program. So we're waiting for other folks to kind of join us here, but we're going to kind of get started here, hoping that there's always somebody out there. So I'm assuming that there are today, they all have a party to go to. So at any rate, we're going to get started. This is an interactive program. And so as an interactive program, we expect other people to be able to add something, ask questions, if you have comments, things that you've experienced, we want to invite you to join us for this conversation. My guest today is Christy Heacock, and she's a doctor, Heacock. And did I say that right, Chris?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Doctor of Philosophy. My doctorate's in psychology. Yeah.
Right. But I thought that the Heacock, I was thinking, did I say that right? Because I thought I had
is right.
Okay, good.
Rhymes with peacock. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of what I thought. At any rate, she has a book that she's recently come out with, relatively recently, and it's called Being Human is Hard. Choose Forgiveness. And our conversation today is actually going to be about forgiveness. And it's one of those kind of conversations that often it's hard to have when we feel like something has happened to us and we feel hurt, we feel threatened, and fear is part of the human experience. Especially, it's one of our most sensitive emotions, and we respond to it in various ways, many times in unproductive ways. But I don't know if we have that much choice about whether it's productive or not, but we respond to fear. And that's an important thing, that we recognize how we're responding to that and whether or not it's working for us. Some people will call it whether or not it's appropriate, but I just like to think of it as, does it work or does it not work? Okay, so we're going to be talking about forgiveness today. So as you have ideas or you have questions or you have comments, please, put them in the chat if you don't feel chatty, but otherwise you're invited to raise your hand or something like that, and we will give you an opportunity to interact, because that is really what this program is about, giving people a chance to interact and wrestle with ideas. So welcome, Christy. Let's talk first about forgiveness as a topic. And because I always believe that you have to define terms so that you know what you're talking about. How would you define forgiveness?
I would define it in the way of being able to let go of whether it's shame, blame, resentments, hurt, pain in a way that will lead to better personal well-being and better relationships. Not that you have to have a relationship, sometimes you have to sever a relationship, but setting boundaries or doing what you need to do so that you feel better about your relationships. And the third thing would be that it leads to personal growth and transformation. Life is full of painful things, and they can set us back, they can freeze us in place, or we can learn from them and figure out how to move forward. So the forgiveness process, the whole purpose of it is for us to be able to move forward, to be able to learn, to grow, to better our relationships, to have fewer headaches and sleep better and all those good things, because we're able to process whatever our pain or hurt is in such a way that it will lead us forward.
With that introduction to forgiveness, let's go to an introduction to Christy Heacock. Tell us who you are. Where did you come from? How did you, develop into the work that you are into now, starting from when you were born?
Well, we don't want to take up too much time with that, but I will just say that my background has been a lot in main background is education, and so I've done a lot of teaching in the social sciences, psych. So I've developed and taught world religions as well as world history, and also taught math. So statistics, that's kind of led me into my doctorate is in psychology, but with a research emphasis then on that. And I got my doctorate later in life. And so I'd done a lot of psychology, but wanted to enrich that. And so when I was a doctor, it's a lot about what you're doing your dissertation on. And I wanted to explore more how psychology and spirituality are related. And so I needed to think of a topic that I wanted to really research and explore. And I narrowed it down to the forgiveness. And forgiveness has played a big part in my life, just learning how to deal with. My dad was pretty angry most of his life, and how I could be able to handle that and not feel like a victim or feel sorry for myself, but to move forward from that, to learn from that. And one of the things I say researching forgiveness does is once you start forgiving, you can develop more of a forgiveness lifestyle, which just helps you let go more, helps you have more freedom, it helps you not get so upset about what you think people should do or what you think you should do, but being able to be much more compassionate. And so I interviewed people for my doctorate then from different faith systems, and they defined it themselves. So there were 10 different faith systems, 12 different people. I have 13 people in my book because I've kept interviewing people. But I looked for what they had in common. So they were different sacred belief systems from, the major ones like Christianity and Islam, Buddhism, but also like Baha'i, Shirdi Baba follower, and someone who was agnostic. And I looked for what they had in common, not for differences so much as what they had in common, how they were able to take a traumatic event, a major offense, and be able to move forward from that, and just what did that for them. And so the main themes I found in that for how they were able to do that was they had courage, they had compassion, and they had creativity. And to gain those things, they also had good connections. But like I said, their faith systems varied. My woman who was agnostic had a really strong family system. Lawrence and I were talking a little earlier about sometimes we think we need to do things all by ourselves, or we're afraid to reach out. But a lot of the theme there too was they had connections, whether it be spiritual, whether it would be religious community, like my Jewish and Baha'i people I interviewed, they had a smaller, just really strong community. Or they had some kind of connection, and some of them had multiple, like therapists, as well as a spiritual connection, but they all reached out for guidance and support. Because if we hold things inside, or if we try to deny them or pretend that it doesn't exist, it usually comes back at us. Either we suffer ourselves, like one of my men, before he was able to forgive, had terrible high blood pressure that was affecting his eyesight, just horrible things happening to his body because it was just eating him up inside. Another thing that can happen if you don't come to grips with things is you can displace it onto others. The people who are angry and resentful, and they won't admit what's inside them, they just lash out at others. So you have those things that can go on if you're not able to just have that guidance, support, reach out, not hold things in or not lash out. And so they were empowered then, all of them, through their guidance and support of their connections, to have the courage to confront things. And that means not denying injustices, because some people get really hung up on that. Well, you're saying that it's going to be okay. But genuine forgiveness is totally the opposite. You confront that and you say, that was not okay. It was not okay they did that. I'm not going to excuse it. I'm not going to deny it. One of the ladies I talked to kind of tried to keep excusing her mother and didn't, who had really hurt her. And it wasn't until she really just was able to say, that really, really hurt. And so instead of excusing it or denying it, really confronting it, having the courage to do that. And then to do it with compassion. So to be able to, instead of saying that really hurt and I'm going to hurt somebody else, is you say, who do I want to be? What's my, one of my ladies said, she kept saying, I want to be true to myself. And true to herself means we all have to ask ourselves, what gives us dignity? What gives us our sense of integrity? So I've got this painful thing that happened, and it could have been extremely traumatic. Some of the people I interviewed, there was torture, there was murderers to forgive. But how do I handle that in a way that is moral? My traditional Lakota lady said she knew from an earlier age, nobody's going to make me hate. I am not going to let people make me into a hateful person. And so that's where the compassion comes in. You have compassion for others as well as yourself. And that's one of the reasons I entitled the book, Being Human is Hard, because I think that's essential, that we say, this being human stuff is not easy. It's not easy for us. It's not easy for others. And that's also where the connections come in. Let's help each other with this. Let's not just isolate and blame and hate on people. How can we find a way to have compassion for each other? And it's not easy, totally not easy. It's tough. And that's why sometimes, even though people feel forgiveness is a virtue, we don't do it, because it's like hate and revenge is much easier, because those are instincts. When we're hurt, our instinct is either to fight, or if someone's more powerful, we flee or we freeze up. So we have to fight that. Like one of my Muslim men saying, he had to step on his emotions, conquer his pride, and just go forth and really work on forgiveness and understanding and compassion. And then I had the 4 C's, the connections, courage, compassion, and then creativity. And then once you process things, the real goal is, how can I write a new story? The old story is a victim story. It's like, and it's totally genuinely legitimate. You were hurt. And it was awful. And there's no denying it. It was an awful thing that happened. But you've got this old story that is holding you back because you're a victim, and you don't want to, and you can enter, like one of my ladies said, enter your house of sorrows, but you can't stay there if you want to move forward. So enter that house of sorrows, grieve it, own it, own whatever your part was in it. I know for me, sometimes what I have to deal with is the fact that I didn't handle it well. I maybe let shame on me for not speaking up or letting somebody hurt me, that type of thing. So, but taking that story as of a victim and figuring out a way, again, I'm not telling you any of this is easy, and processing things. And sometimes it's called post-traumatic growth, taking that and being able to then learn from it and let it transform you, let it provide you with more empathy and compassion for others, to make you stronger, to make you wiser. So using that creativity, and one of the parts of creativity is persistence. And that's where it may not be easy, but you don't give up. You find a way to take whatever the story is that's causing you pain and process it with that courage and compassion so that you can find a way to move forward.
One of the things that seem to be a roadblock to forgiveness is fear, the fear that this thing, will happen again. And a lot of times people, they say that even if they have an antidote for it, but it just seems like that whole thing of like putting on your armor because you think the arrows are coming, the spears are coming, or the sword is going. And so, putting on that armor, especially defensiveness, and, that's one thing. And the other thing is some people have a principle of never forgiving and never saying, I'm sorry, because it feels like capitulation. It feels like you are weakening and putting your belly up, so to speak, as the dogs would put it. You're exposing your belly by forgiving. Can you speak to that?
Mm-hmm. Those are real legitimate things to consider, because the way I look at it, you can't, if you've got an issue that's causing you pain, especially right now, someone's abusing you or someone is oppressing you, what have you. You have to work on how to process that so that you feel a sense of safety. And until you feel that, you're not going to be able to let go, because and so it's a whole process. So let's say someone is hurting you. You have to dig deep and have the courage to say, okay, this is not right. And sometimes, like you said, it's the fear of change. And sometimes, gosh, you have to really look at, okay, what are the pros and cons? Let's say you're an abused spouse, but you've got kids to worry about, or you don't know how you're going to have income, or you have to kind of look at the whole picture. And that's where, forgiveness is not something, if it's a tough situation, you don't just forgive. And we had talked about, if a person is in a situation like that and someone's just telling them, well, just forgive, that can actually contribute to your shame and make it even harder to forgive. And so you really have to allow that time, because some things are just going to be hard. But if you can figure a way to set boundaries with someone, for example, with my dad, I ended up having to take care of him, and he had an anger problem. But what helped me a lot is I set boundaries with him. And he kind of knew. I said, Dad, if you start getting angry, I'm leaving. And I'd come back, but he knew I was going to leave. I wasn't going to put up with his angry outbursts. And what that did for me then is that I could still have the integrity to know, okay, I'm the sibling that has to deal with this. And, but I'm going to do it in such a way that I have integrity, but I'm going to set my boundaries so I don't feel like a victim. I don't want to feel sorry for myself. I want to be someone who doesn't sit on the pity potty too long. Now and then you got to complain, right? You got to vent, but you don't want to just hang on to this victim stuff. You want to be empowered. And I put that in my title too, secondary title. You're empowered by forgiveness, empowered then. So finding a way to deal with it. And sometimes, of course, you have to have to leave someone who's abusive. And if it is that case, then to have compassion for them is like the just mercy. You know, you're like, I can't stay here with this, but I wish you the best. And my Baha'i lady just, boy, she had quite the stories, but she was able to say and accept everybody's on their own path. And I've got to let go of thinking that I can just change their path. The only path I can change is my own. And so what can I do so that I can feel safe? Because I agree, Lawrence, that I think safety, and some of the research talks about that too. When we feel fearful and our amygdala is on high alert, I mean, it's hard to think rationally. It's really hard. And we have to find whatever it is that'll get us to slow down. And I think of it as upshifting our thinking, because naturally as human beings, we need to survive. And so we have a big fear instinct. And it just comes naturally. We don't have to work at it. It just comes. It's easy. We feel fear, we feel resentment. But to upshift our thinking, to do that though, we still have to figure out a way to feel safe. Because if we're not, whether it be because mentally we're being hurt or physically we're being hurt, it's really important to deal with that, especially because there are real fears. And then there are, of course, we can get into imagined fears too.
Imagined fears.
But if it's real fear, it needs to be, you know, you need to deal with that. Did that answer that?
I think, you know, these are hard questions, and it's hard to gauge how people hear it. So we're going to keep working on it, but I think you gave us a real good start. I would like to talk about, kind of on the same level, I would like to talk about people who absorb that tort, and tort in this case means somebody did something to them that, you know, that they should forgive for their own, for this conversation, when they should forgive for their own good, if nothing else. But let's say sometimes people like attach their even sense of who they are to who has hurt them, who is, quote, the enemy, you know, who's for me and against me, who's my tribe. And one of the most important numbers that I've come across in the last 30 years, if not more, is Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number is so important because it says that we have a neurological barrier to how many people that we can process and have, you know, like have an emotional connection to, because it requires repetition. It requires doing things with those people. It requires the ability to read their face and know something about them, like if they have kids and what kind of stresses. That, even if you just say chronologically how much time it takes to know that, even at the speed of light, there is a finite number. And for most people, it's around between 100 and 150. So if we have that barrier to, you know, people that we can understand and we have a connection to, then it seems, you know, we end up saying, well, all those other people, they're kind of like mind clutter. So it seems like the mind plays a trick on us to find ways to exclude people, because simply we don't want to say, you know, it's sort of like you don't want to admit that you don't have enough money to cover a check. You know what I mean? So it's like, it almost like the mind plays a trick on us and looking for ways that we can say that person's off my list. I don't have to send that Christmas card. And so our sense of who we are gets attached to who has hurt me, you know, much the same as who has helped me. And I think since we fear, it seems like it's the brain again is like I want to make sure I stay alive. So I'm looking for things that's going to harm me more than I am looking for things that help me. Like we fear loss more than we appreciate gain. All of those kind of things thrown in together. It seems like we're set up not to forgive. Have you seen any of that or something like that in your research? And can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think our main reactive system is very tribal. And that is, and I think being really aware of that is important. That, yeah, it's going to be natural that we're going to feel anger, and that we're going to feel resentment, or that we're going to think that those people who don't think like us are wrong. And um, yeah, I think understanding our human condition is really important, and that is what in the past has been important for survival. So that's how we're programmed. But if we look at our society now, if we keep going with that, you look at the weapons we have, you look at the division in our country, it's like, okay, if we keep going with this, what's going to happen? Is this adaptive? Is this
Exactly.
good for us? Is it good for our society? And that's where we make a decision. That's why I choose forgiveness. I when I was looking for people to interview, I don't know why this just came up on my screen. Okay. When I was looking for people to interview, I remember one person that was referred to me. I don't know why it was referred to me. I guess because I was looking for someone who was atheist or agnostic, so I was getting kind of desperate. I ended up finding a wonderful example, but he just was like, of course I don't forgive some of these relatives of mine. They're awful. And he went on about that. And then I said, well, that's, my study is about people who have forgiven. So, that's who I'm looking for. And he was like, well, you should change your study. That's ridiculous. So it was kind of interesting to talk to him, because he was just like, well, good grief. Of course, it's better to, resent these people that
Hold
are
on to
doing
it.
things the wrong
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so, and it is kind of part of our society. I still remember going to this little chapel, and it was a church, a chapel, and it had all these posters of Elvis Presley getting revenge in his movies on all these people. And so revenge was this big theme. So we see it a lot, and yeah, and I've talked to people who say, I really like, because we can get a lot of kudos for hating on people, right? We we can get likes on our Facebook page for putting out some horrible stuff. We can get elected to political office by putting out terrible things about other people that we're supposed to hate and fear. And we buy into it a lot of times, because it's so much easier to do that than to say, well, I want to understand what these people think. I want to understand their viewpoint, or maybe I'll share with these people, or it's just a lot tougher. And we can keep with that kind of thinking, but is that, again, you have to ask yourself, who are you? Are you being true to yourself? Is that really where your integrity comes from? Is that really where your moral values come from? And when it comes to religion or political ideology or whatever, for me, and again, you have to choose this. I'd rather choose something that helps me fear less instead of more, something that makes me more curious than condemning, something that leads me to love and compassion instead of hate and revenge. And we have to make those choices. But like you were saying, Lawrence, doing that requires upshifting to our cerebral cortex. And you can look at like brain chemistry and look at our brain. Our more primitive, sometimes it's called a reptilian brain, is the one that wants to lash out, that gets ensconced in, whether it be religion or politics or just your gossipy neighbor who wants to put dirt on everybody. Or do you want to upshift your thinking and really think about some of those higher virtues? Self-control is a
Well,
virtue in all the major religions. And that means, okay, I've got these instincts, but are they really doing me any good? And when we give positive strokes to negative stuff, well, we're all influenced by reinforcers. So if people are reinforcing our nastiness, they're saying, yeah, you should hate on that person, they're terrible. We're getting all this reinforcement. So naturally we're gonna go with it and do more of it. So it's tougher to say, well, I know these are our out group, but maybe we should listen to them. Ooh, that's tough.
yeah, that's tough. And I think one of the things that's come out in some brain research in the last 5 or 10 years is that the amygdala, what we were talking about, that emotional brain, it actually has the ability chemically to shut down the prefrontal cortex, the exact part of the rational thinking that we need to do that. It actually shuts that down, and it shuts it down. The idea about why that happens is because in our earlier iterations of humanity, we just had to get out of there or fight. And then the brain just wants to keep us alive. And it's saying, hey, all of that philosophical stuff is great, but get out of here now. So the problem is if we keep that going, then it actually, let's say it's bad for our whole physical self, because it's not just that, it's all the other hormones and stuff that it puts out to keep us sometimes at a baseline of anxiety, because those chemicals have adrenaline and things. That's one of the more ones we're more familiar with. It keeps us in a fight or flight state, and that fight or flight state is not something that you're supposed to sustain. It will overwork the whole core, the whole body, and not to mention the mind, etc. So to me, it begs the question of how we do that. But before we get into that, I would like to open it up to the other esteemed panel as to any questions they might have, comments they might want to add to this conversation. Anybody?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question regarding forgiving oneself.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Well,
go ahead.
Sometimes we think we have the right idea, we have the right intentions, and we set out to do whatever we think those intentions require of us. And then we discover later that we've actually said something or did something in a way that hurt somebody else. And it comes like a boomerang back at us. And you carry that around like a heavy burden of rock on your back. And you're ashamed to go and fix the situation. So you just live with that miserable state and you avoid that person because it's something that you can't face, because it's yourself. It's yourself you're having trouble facing.
I asked the question, to my people, what's harder, self-forgiveness or other forgiveness? And most of them said self-forgiveness. It's really can be very hard. We're harder on ourselves oftentimes because we have these expectations, or maybe we've grown up thinking we should always do things perfectly and we should never hurt anyone else's feelings. But I think accepting, that's where accepting our vulnerability, or for me anyway, just being able to say, this being human, I mean, we're not born knowing how to perform. We're born figuring out how things work. We're born to learn things, to evolve, to adapt, to be transformed. And so it is very hard. I think it's harder to forgive myself than to forgive other people, because I do have those expectations, and it really makes me mad when I mess up or that type of thing. But I think the main thing that for anybody, you know, when you're talking about that, is to have the compassion for yourself. And that doesn't mean excusing yourself, but being able to say, you know, I did this and I wish I hadn't, but I'm going to learn from it. And we all are learning. We're all doing the best we can. We're all on a path. And I think when we can forgive ourselves and just be gentle with ourselves, maybe might be a better way to put it, is like, yeah, admit we messed up, take responsibility for it, but be gentle, be compassionate, because how are we supposed to know? We've got to learn these things. I mean, we're not born with this. We're born, like we're talking about, with a tendency to get mad and to be fearful and all that. So we've really, the beauty is that we can be, when we're compassionate with ourselves, usually it helps us be compassionate with others too. It's like we're able to really accept that this human condition is tough and that we're going to mess up, and that's okay. And the beauty of doing that and doing whatever you can to atone, sometimes, you know, maybe the person is gone, but sometimes you can just tell that person, hey, you know, and then a burden can be lifted when you do it, if you're able to find a good way to do it, in whatever way that works for you, to be able to atone for that. But even if they aren't forgiving, it is really important to just have that vulnerability and that humility to be able to say, hey, yeah, I messed up in the past and I'm going to mess up in the future. And that's just part of being human. But I think when you can forgive yourself, it's so powerful, because I think it leads to being able to just forgive others and being able to be okay with our human condition. It just frees you, when you're able to just accept that that's the way it is. We're going to have mistakes, we're going to have regrets, but we can learn from them. And that's the beauty of it. We can learn from them. We can give each other grace. We can have that compassion, and we can use that, because if you hadn't messed up, you wouldn't have learned, you know, you learned from it and now you're a new person. And that's a beautiful thing.
Did that address your question, Laniko?
Yes, I was just curious too, how self-talk is part of the process of recognizing a way to internalize self-forgiveness.
I agree with you. Yeah. Because what we tell ourselves is so important. There's a phrase that says, you know, we don't have to believe everything we think, because like we said, a lot of our instincts will come up and will be, you know, like, I know I'm like that. Something happens and, you know, my first instinctual thought is really growly and not at all admirable. But I can tell myself, okay, that's just my, you know, old growly self. But I don't have to act on that. And I don't have to believe it either. I can go ahead and upshift my thinking to something that has a lot more integrity, that is a lot more loving and compassionate and courageous. And think, you know, and think, okay, this happened, but what can I do to create something good from this that I wish hadn't happened? But that doesn't mean I can't make something beautiful out of it, or something at least wise, and learn from it.
You
And
mentioned
self-talk, yes.
but you know, you mentioned a few times, you know, like more or less getting a sort of a higher view, or upshifting and things. But how does what's the practice that one does to be able to do that? Because as I mentioned before, you know, there is a physical thing happening in the brain where the amygdala like throws in these
Mhm.
hormones, and suddenly that part that's still rational, you know,
Mhm.
that's why we have crimes of passion. And the moment that thing is
Mhm.
done, the person is really sorry for it and realizes a mistake. But before that, that thought could not come. It just, you know, and now we have like actual brain scans to demonstrate why that is the case. So that given, how do we get to the point that we have at least more control over that process? What are some practices
That's
that we could do?
that's a really great question. And I think like with speaking for myself and for the people I interviewed, a lot of it is just getting in touch with what are your values? What are your sacred beliefs? And as I said, I interviewed people from various religions, but the thing is, when you look at the world religions and you look at the virtues, they remain consistent. But you still have to choose them. But the virtues are forgiveness and self-control and love and generosity. And but you have to choose whether that is the path you want to take or not. Because like we said, you can get a lot of kudos for going down a more negative, hateful path. So you have to decide. And I guess the way I would say is, when those thoughts come to you, you have to say, okay, do I want to act on these? Or do I believe in something else? And that's where your spirituality, your religion, your upbringing, like I said, you might have these strong family values, or maybe you're just, totally like my one lady was Buddhist philosophy. She didn't want the religion part. She just wanted the philosophy part, but she shared those virtues and values. So knowing yourself, knowing who you want to be, being true to yourself. I know for me, I always read devotions at night and different things to keep myself on a path that I can feel good about. And I think I was reading about the Dalai Lama, and I thought it was kind of nice that he has to read. I don't know. He said he spends an hour or two just trying to center himself so that he can maintain his integrity. So it takes some effort there to figure out, okay, who do I want to be? What path do I want to take? What kind of person do I want to be? So when my naughty thoughts come, or when whatever, just being able to say, is this who I want to be? How do I want to deal with this? And making that choice then. Am I going to choose forgiveness? Because, I just think of sometimes when something's happening and I want to just blame the other person because that's so much easier, they should change or whatever. And then I remind myself, okay, I can't change somebody else, but I can change how I react to this. And it's be easier if they would just change, but they won't. So I've got to work on myself.
Well, I what you're saying calls back some conversations with Richard Thaler and Dan Ariely, who are in the field of behavioral economics, and it deals a lot with people why they actually do what they do, and with, unlike other of the soft sciences, they actually have figured out a way in economics to do actual tests to test their ideas. So some of the discussions they had was many laws and expectations that we have, including religious edicts, we make in the cold state. In other words, we're rational. We talk about, and think it out and say, oh, what is a better way? They said, but when we're confronted with crises, when we are stimulated emotionally, we actually go into what they call a hot state. In other words, you can have lots of laws about forgiveness, or, like you shouldn't, shoot somebody who cusses you out. They say, but in the hot state, since the amygdala shuts down the prefrontal cortex, it's a moot point, because, okay, afterwards you're going to agree, And it seems to me that the problem with forgiveness is that we stay at least in a warm state, and we even nurture that warm state, by trying, because we feel attached to it, because to let it go will feel like, well, they could hurt me again. And then you go, just the fear that they could hurt you again throws you back into the hot state. So it seems that we're in as you mentioned in the title of your book, it's hard, it's being human is hard, it seems that
Mhm.
we're set up. It seems that we're almost set up to fail.
Well, but we don't have to fail. It's just that it's hard. And
Yeah.
so, like the people I interviewed, the reason they wanted to be interviewed, or even the
Mm,
reason I chose the subject, was that
mm,
once you get the hang of it, you can
mm,
develop a forgiveness lifestyle that allows you to get rid of a lot of that
mm.
cortisol that's clogging up your pores. And
Right. Can you
yeah,
talk
it's going to
about
take
that
some
lifestyle?
effort. I
Well,
I don't
can
know,
can you
but
talk about that lifestyle and how we might develop that?
yeah. Um, you develop the lifestyle first. You just start um, well with the courage, compassion, creativity that I mentioned, and then getting the connections. Have people that support you, and the supportive people need to be those that will listen and not give you a bunch of advice, but let you process it yourself in your own time. And I'd hear that, process it yourself in your own time. Also, it can be developing that spirituality where your vision of the divine is loving and merciful, because let's face it, with religion, you have so many. If someone says they believe in God, it can mean many,
Right.
many, many things. It
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
same religion, people interpret tons of different ways. So, having that loving, nurturing feeling, and usually you need to get it by connecting. It's hard to just feel loved and all that just totally on your own, but you can still develop that spirituality, that sense of being loved, that part of you in that way. um so let's see, I think I lost my train of thought here. um and then I also think it's really important, and this was after, in fact, this was after I was even working on the dissertation, and I had a real tough situation with someone that I was working with that was very, she was really trying to get others to dislike what I was doing. She was spreading some pretty nasty things about me. And one of the things that really helped, besides just really working on the forgiveness, was gratitude. So I also think that gratitude, and at first when I was researching and I read that, I wasn't as clear about that. But I tell you what, after, maybe that's why I had that terrible experience, because it really realized that when you got negative stuff happening, you've got this fear, you got this hate, you got this, and it's coming at you, and maybe you're surrounded by people and news and whatever that's so negative. How do you fuel up? How do you go from darkness to light? And so being able to find those things you're grateful for, whether it be a great cup of coffee, nature is always a big thing for a lot of people. Being, whatever you're thankful for, just being able to fuel up on that. And that comes back to, when Lanico, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, talked about self-talk. What are you surrounding yourself with? So being able to have that gratitude, being able to find a connection that will help you go towards the light instead of the darkness, because it can be easy to just get enwrapped in the darkness because of our instincts. And so being able to somehow, and again, don't be afraid to reach out, get help, so that you can go more towards the light, to find things that are going to move you forward so that you feel good about who you are.
I want to open it up one more time to our esteemed guest. Vicky, did you have something you want to add?
Yes. At what time, like, what are the parameters that you would put in your head to decide just to leave a relationship in a verbally abusive situation? Some people can handle more. They can have forgiveness by, say, understanding where the person is coming from. They were verbally abused. But what is, I'm thinking about in marriage. A couple women have
Mhm.
said to me, if I go to a counselor, they'll tell me to leave. and financially I can't. So at what point do you really put the boundary up and say, I'm leaving? There has to be a separation. There's no cure for this.
And that's a very personal question for that person. And that's the thing. I think talking with them as far as the pros and cons, because I know it's true that reality is that you have to make some tough choices sometimes. And then the forgiveness part of it is just being able to, once you've decided whether it's you're going to stay or leave, what boundaries you're going to set, whatever it is and that person is the one who has to decide, because, as much as you maybe would love to just say, you need to get out of there. It's going to be their decision, because we can't make that for someone else, but we can be there for them and say, help them look at, okay, what are your options, and help them in the way too of, because you want them to look at this abusive spouse, not necessarily realistically, but you don't want to fill them with just hate for the person or whatever, because that's probably not going to help them. But they've got to figure out where they're going to set those boundaries. They're going to have to figure out when it's time to leave. And as much as we maybe want to decide it for them, the main thing we can do is be there for them and help them really process what's going on, what their options are, how they can create something better. Because again, that creativity part, and if they're stuck in a story and it just is not changing, just doing what you can to figure out with them, okay, how can we create something? How can you be empowered to create something better in this situation? So, and sometimes there's some really tough situations out there, but just helping move forward, set the boundaries, being there for them, supporting and guiding.
You mentioned earlier. Oh, somebody else? Oh, I see. I got feedback. You mentioned earlier that gratitude was important, and you were going to start to explore that. I don't know if you finished that thought, or how gratitude interacts or addresses one's ability to forgive.
I just think, and please feel free to ask questions, especially if I'm not being clear, but gratitude's been linked with forgiveness. And like I said, it took me a little time to kind of figure that out, and having that experience that was really tough helped me figure it out, that when it seems like, when something really traumatic or hard is happening to you, so that you don't go down in too much of the depths of despair, it really helps to just figure out what you're thankful for. And I actually have a practice too. Pretty much every night I try to think of 10 things that I'm grateful for. I just count the blessings. I also pray for people that I know are hurting, that type of thing. Those are the things. And I think, and maybe even the praying for others is good. It takes you out of yourself as well, because sometimes that's why it can be so hard, because there's this negativity and we're so into ourselves. And so when we can, like going for a walk or talking to someone, or volunteering to help someone else. One phrase I kind of like is forgiving is for giving, because when we work on it, we can be much better at giving to others. So the gratitude, the counting our blessings, the praying for others that are hurting, or like a number of the people I interviewed said, pray for those people that are the ones that have hurt you. Looking at them, because that helps look at them with more compassion. With forgiveness, when you look at the research, one of the things that comes through time and time again is that forgiveness is good for your personal well-being. It's good for your health, because you let go of some of that the cortisol, the things that are blocking you, that are causing the headaches, that are causing the lack of sleep. So it's good for you, but it's also good for those around you, because you're not so stuck in your shame or your problems, and you're just able to expand. And that was interesting too. It was so great doing these interviews, because I just kept learning. And that's why, just keep reading the devotions or motivational things. A lot of people mention that. Just keep those things that'll keep you on that higher level, whatever it is that does that for you. But doing those things that allow you to, they called it, a couple people said you'd have more space. I thought that was interesting. That's how they talked about forgiveness. You gain more space. And I think it's because you're opening your heart, you're opening your mind, and you're able to just get out of your own self, and you can expand your space. And someone said, like one of my women, she talked about, she definitely set boundaries. That really helped her when she set boundaries to forgive. But she also, because she got better and better, you can get more of a forgiveness lifestyle where you can let things go. She also had a friend she knew was hurting, and she said she could just let things go through her like the wind. And if it's minor and you understand it, and when you get better at forgiveness, certain things, you can just let them go with you like the wind. Major things will never be like that. Major things you'll always have to process. But you can get better at letting the small things go, being grateful for the good things, and not focusing so much on the little things that might be keeping you from a lot of joy.
Mhm. Well, those things really do seem to link up in the sense that if you are focusing on what you have to be grateful for, you can feel less of a victim, and when you feel less of a victim, it's easier to just say, okay, I don't really have to hang on to that, because I don't, when you're not feeling victimized, you feel less threatened, and
Mhm.
so seeing that you have, I use the old, monkey and the grape trick. It's like if I don't have any grapes and the monkey over there has grapes, I'm not feeling good, But if I'm
Mhm.
starting to see, hey, I got some grapes over here too, and they're not those grapes, but I don't really care about those grapes, because I have plenty of grapes over here, or okay, I would like another grape, but I got a lot of grapes here too, so I'm okay, But if
Mhm.
you see no grapes, you know, now you're starting to feel like the world is, I can actually feel imminent doom because I got nothing,
Mhm.
I don't even have any celery, let alone grapes. So it seems to me that those, being grateful and having the ability to forgive are kind of um, joined at the hip, as they say. They are very close together.
I kind of think of it as giving you that fuel you need to process and deal with really tough stuff. Because tough stuff
Yes.
happens to us. And when it does, we need some way to keep going, to fuel up. We still have to deal with the tough stuff. But gratitude gives us that more energy to be able to do that, to be able to deal with the tough things in life.
Right. Well, as Lanico has said in the chat, it's really too bad we don't have actually a lot more time to deal with with this particular issue, because there's so many things and there's so much more depth that we could get into. And it kind of takes a while to wind into it and to get our mind to thinking about it, because it's complex and
Mhm.
it's hard stuff to do, and we don't often have practice in thinking about it. So to that end, I would like to thank you for sharing this very important topic and giving us a chance, or at least motivating us to start thinking about it. And I'd like to thank all of our other panel for joining us and reminding you that we will be back again next week, same time, same station, and come back and visit us. Thank you, and we'll see you another time. Thanks again.
Yes, be happy to come back. Okay.